Organizations that are more diverse have better bottom lines. You're having an influx of different perspective, an influx of different ideas, and the contribution is completely different, and that impacts you in a very, very real way. So the objectives are real. It's not a nice to have. It's something that is going to set apart winners and losers from a corporate standpoint. So now the expectations of those organizations is to walk the talk. They've all done a brilliant job in messaging their organizations. Their EVPs look great, sound great. There's a lot of fantastic messaging that goes out that feels really authentic and was very effective in bringing diverse groups of the population into their organization. So there's still work to be done. That work is important. That work is hugely beneficial and shouldn't be abandoned now.
The energy industry has changed significantly over the last decade, and with it, the diversity of people, backgrounds, skills, and experiences has widened. Businesses across the energy sector have made an effort to attract, recruit, and retain a workforce that reflects their values, mission, and communities. But let's face it, the path to diversity isn't always smooth. The challenges are real and complex, from unconscious bias in hiring to the struggle to retain diverse talent. This is Staffing Strategies Simplified, and in this episode, we're pulling back the curtain on DE&I. I'm Matt Nicholson, and today I'm joined by Shalena Shaheed, Managing Director of NES Advantage. Shalena talks about her experience of recruitment in the energy industry, including the developments in diversity and inclusivity policies and their effect in practice, providing actionable insights for businesses to reinvigorate their DE&I strategies and get ahead of the competition by attracting the best talent available. So our first question today is, you've worked in energy recruitment for a while, and during that time, how have you seen things change?
Well, what has changed is energy recruitment in itself wasn't a thing that long ago. So you said for a while, can't really be for a while because for a while it didn't exist. So the biggest change has been the shift and energy now encompassing all sources of energy and organizations that are now energy companies historically focused in their one niche area, whether it was fossil fuels, whether it was renewables with solar or wind turbines, for example. Now, organizations, certainly the large ones, have heavily invested and can proudly say that they are energy organizations, no longer oil and gas organizations or whatever the case may be. So that's been the biggest shift, is that this industry that I'm in is actually new in itself, even though it doesn't feel like it's new for me. That shift is very, very real, and that's something I'm very proud of.
Brilliant, thank you. So yeah, obviously the energy market itself, like you say, is shifting. Expectations and understanding of the market is changing as well. And as new people come in and change the way we are generating and consuming energy, the market for candidates changes as well. So what does the reality of diversity in the energy market look like right now versus expectations?
It's a really good question, and it's there's two parts to it. So because the energy industry, particularly the energy transition industry, where organizations are making a huge push of moving from traditional oil and gas and fossil fuels energy sources to renewables, that focus is new, and it's huge. I can't say there's a single company out there that was a traditional fossil fuel organization that has not, at least in some small ways, made the move towards renewables. So it's a hugely in demand market when you think about the talent within that space. But the opportunity here is that the talent within this space didn't exist 5 6 years ago. 5 6 years ago, we were looking for people with a very traditional background, and we wanted them to have 10 15 years of experience. So then you wind back the clock to 10 15 years ago. Okay, what was happening largely within different societies? Were there opportunities for diverse parts of the population to have access to the same degrees of education, the same degrees of opportunities? And the answer is largely no. So 5 6 years ago, when you're targeting those diverse candidates, it's not that they didn't exist, but they wouldn't have had the opportunity to be at that same even playing field as the non-diverse parts of the population usually. But now we are in this space where it's even the playing field a bit more. It definitely is not completely a flat playing ground, but that equity gap has been narrowed, because when you think about what was happening 5 6 years ago, there was certainly a lot more opportunities for diverse parts of population to get into education, to um, be given more opportunities at work. So suddenly, even though everyone is fighting for the same kind of talent, that talent pool looks a lot more diverse than what the talent pools were that we were fishing in from 10 15 years ago.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think, yeah, in what you're saying, over the last few years, the market and the talent pool has changed quite a lot, and businesses and organizations within the industry had set DEI goals. So, looking a little bit more at DEI within organizations, in some markets, there's a preconception that the focus is shifting away from that a little bit. So, why, from your perspective and your experience within the industry, why should that still be on the agenda?
So the perception is that yes, it has shifted, and when we ran our Women in Energy survey, this came across very strongly. Employees, both male and female, have seen now that their companies are less committed to their DEI objectives. So it's not something that companies can walk back on quietly. Their employees are very aware that the focus that was on it a couple of years ago is not quite the same anymore, and that's not a good message for your employees to be receiving from you, whether that's intentional or unintentional. They're very aware. And the problem with this is, they set out with DEI objectives, and those DEI objectives was not just to benefit the populations that would benefit from those opportunities, but organizations that are more diverse have better bottom lines. You're having an influx of different perspective, an influx of different ideas, and the contribution is completely different, and that impacts you in a very, very real way. So the objectives are real. It's not a nice to have. It's something that is going to set apart winners and losers from a corporate standpoint. So they've not finished the race, they've not met the end goal, and then they've shifted elsewhere. And that's a huge miss. I akin it to running a race or even a marathon that you've trained so hard for. You're doing really, really well. You're running this huge marathon, and then before you hit the finish line, you're like, wait, hang on a sec. We're not going to run this race anymore. We're going to run a different race. It's just a huge miss that they've gone into this approach, and the reasons for it are disappointing as well. It's come from, I don't want to say large groups, but certainly vocal and influential groups that have urged educational institutions first to move away from taking a strong DEI approach, and those groups are for various reasons very, very protective of reverting back to how things was, and going back to that society that I described 10 15 years ago, where diverse parts of the population didn't have the same opportunities in education, in life, in work, etc., because of all the obstacles that are put in front of them that non-diverse parts of society may not necessarily have to face. So there's still work to be done. That work is important. That work is hugely beneficial and shouldn't be abandoned now.
Yeah, and companies that have kind of done some of that work, now, between the work that we've done as an organization through our surveys and such, and also information that comes back from the very people that these initiatives were put in place to help. The responses are coming back, and they're saying, what needs to happen next. So businesses that are looking to continue with this strategy, as they should be, to take that feedback and say, right, this is the next step to reach the finish line, as you mentioned. For those businesses thinking about where they are now and the next steps, what are the biggest challenges, particularly in the energy industry? What are the biggest challenges they face with inclusivity and diversity?
So now the expectations of those organizations is to walk the talk. They've They've all done a brilliant job in messaging their organizations. Their EVPs look great, sound great. There's a lot of fantastic messaging that goes out that feels really authentic, and was very effective in bringing diverse groups of the population into their organization. Now, the challenge on them is to hold to their commitment, the things that they promised in a lot of this messaging needs to be felt, needs to be realized by the individuals that were brought in. So it's not just necessarily from a retention standpoint; it's also from an engagement standpoint. It's how do they then ensure that all aspects of the employee population, not just the diverse aspects, because this is the expectation of all their employees, is how do they engage them in work that is meaningful, in work that truly has an impact, beyond just that organization. Does it impact the society that they're part of? Does it impact the world in a positive way? What are the opportunities for mobility? And it's not just necessarily about upward mobility. People aren't always looking to climb that career ladder. Certainly, we're seeing that with different generations. What they want is variety in their work, as I keep saying, meaningful work. So it's all these things that companies really need to be intentional about, and not just hope it'll happen, just by the nature of the role. That's where they have to be very, very proactive and intentional about their engagement efforts, and this will benefit all their employees, because, as I said, this is the expectation, not just for women, minorities, different aspects of the diversity spectrum, but all employees are expecting these.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think that covers quite a lot for our next question as well, actually. But from your experience, why do you think that there are some demographics that, despite this work and with their understanding of the energy industry in general, aren't attracted to the roles in the energy industry? What are the barriers for them?
I think there is definitely still a distinct lack of awareness. I mean, obviously, for us working in the energy um, industry, we're very aware that it's not oil and gas. We're very aware that it's not fossil fuels. We're very aware of the transition that we're in right now. But if you imagine, kids who have never worked with anyone that comes from any of these backgrounds, whether it's oil and gas or renewables, it's not something that occurs to them. It's not something that they get much exposure to. So when a recruiter calls them and say, "Hey, do you want to work for so and so company?" And I've never heard of that company. What did they do? And you start to explain energy. If their backgrounds in IT, for example, and they spend many years learning about programming, and thinking, how on earth is programming going to apply to this organization and this industry? So that lack of awareness is an initial barrier. And then when you're able to bring down that barrier and talk to them about the opportunities and the projects, I keep going to that meaningful work, is making sure that they understand what is the significance of what they're getting themselves into. They never considered it, they've never heard of it. Now you're having to bridge that gap of, okay, now that I've made the sell to you, this is what it actually looks like, and this is how it aligns to who you are as a person. So making sure that they can cross those bridges to what their own agendas are, not just on a professional level, but what we're definitely seeing with candidates in the market over the last few years is they want um, uh, their work, they want their jobs to align to all aspects of who they are. It's no longer just a paycheck. It's how they find themselves in this world, and how they contribute to what's going on around them. It all has to align. We see a lot more visibility on social media, people talking about what they do, and good or bad, they share everything. So you're using that same lens to evaluate the opportunities and prospects, and even the jobs that you're in. So those are barriers that didn't exist before. We were recruiting people who were at least aware of the industry, because that's what they studied in school. That was a decision they made when they were 16, 17 years old, thinking what courses they wanted to get into. And then when they were looking at opportunities, it was very clear cut. How am I going to pay my bills? What's the next step, etc. Now you're having to sell something to someone that's never heard of it, and then also trying to help them understand how it aligns to all aspects of themselves as a person, not just the professional side.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's definitely a huge part, I think, for certainly young people as well. And it's also getting across the transferable skills and soft skills that people develop outside of the industry that they can bring in that they wouldn't necessarily be aware of. And also the flip side of that, I suppose, as well, is companies and organizations who continue to refine and revitalize and adapt their DEI strategies are then going to attract these people with different core skills, different transferable skills that can bring new ideas to the table and drive the industry forward.
Exactly, and that's the wonderful thing about it, right? Is when you take this DI approach and it forces you to be more creative in where you target those talent pools, and you start to look outside of where you would have historically, and that's really been the birth of the skills based approach. You're no longer just looking at people who have the experience, who have the educational qualifications, who have the background to do the job, because it doesn't exist. The job didn't exist a few years ago. So what are you talking about? So then you have to be more lateral in your thinking. And go, okay, let's take a skills approach. If they have this skills, does it really matter what industry they worked in? Does it really matter what school they went to? If they even went to school, all of those things suddenly become irrelevant. And what that brings is this wonderful mix of perspectives and influences and contribution from a much more varied um, employee base than what we would have had before. And we see it with the really, really cool stuff that comes out now from, organizations that maybe in the past were a little bit stuffy, a little bit boring, are now doing really, really exciting work. And when you look at the people involved in that work, you would never have thought of putting them into those organizations 6, 7 years ago, and now they're thriving in it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's going to generally support businesses with their DEI strategies, and making and opening their minds to think about where they are now, and how they can improve with that sort of feedback. Our next question kind of comes into what can they actually do. So, what should companies start looking at when they're improving or revitalizing their DEI strategies?
So I think they do need to be looking at the pulse point surveys that they do within their organization. Ask meaningful questions to all aspects of the organization. Obviously, I'm a very data driven person. What are the stats telling you? What are your retention rates like? What are your promotion rates like? So you take the sense of the employees through those surveys, but then the data tells you how that's transferring into a real way. um, and that will give you a good baseline as to where you are as an organization. And I think they'll find that all aspects of their population do want similar things. As I keep saying, they want work that's meaningful. They want to work for an organization that aligns with who they are. They want to be able to pursue their passions and their hobbies outside of work. So as an organization, what can you do to support all of these things? And I think I would say, the vast majority of companies already have these things. It's just about how they message it to their internal population, but also how they ensure that there is equitable access to those opportunities, to those things, that it's not just something that's kept for an elite group, or it's not just something that's kept for certain parts of the world or certain levels within the organization. You have to take that holistic view to ensure that everyone across the organization has access to work that's meaningful, to projects that will impact beyond just that organization, that employees are supported in all aspects of um, what their own personal agendas are, not just what they do when they're at work.
Brilliant, thank you. Think that's all really good points, and it kind of leads me on to my next question quite well in terms of the practical things that businesses can be doing to both measure the success of their DEI strategies, um, and also, how do they identify their barriers, overcome those barriers, and what kind of data should they be getting back from their employees, and the actions they should take.
And I think a good place to start is a lot of questions that we ask in our Women in Energy survey, right? Not to put a plug in there, but it does give food for thought in terms of where people are thinking. The surprising thing is this year on year shift towards more of that meaningful work rather than that what's in it for me from a money standpoint, from a benefit standpoint. So looking at different aspects of what employees could be thinking of and being really honest when you're asking those questions. They shouldn't be questions that give you answers because those are the things you can influence. You do need to look at yourself openly and honestly, and um, uh, ask even the difficult questions, even the things that you can't change in the short term. You should still be thinking about finding out where your employees' positions are on those, so that you understand where your gaps are, and truly how much work you have ahead of you. And I think this is something that organizations need to examine very closely, is that all aspects of the organization need to be fully committed to this. Too often there seems to be a gap, certainly a gap in the middle. And for us, coming from a recruitment lens, we see that the companies we work with at the senior leadership level are very, very committed to improving the DEI position, whether that's having more diverse representation, whether that's having um, uh, more diverse mobility, etc. And then we see them push that down to TA and HR and making it a TA or recruitment and HR issue, but it isn't. We are facilitating what that strategy is. It's that group in the middle that really has that most influence in engaging these populations and making sure that they feel that what they're doing is meaningful, making sure that they feel that they're valued, making sure that the roles that they're in align with themselves as people. It's not just up to recruiters to bring them into the organization. It's not just up to HR to make sure that they feel valued and part of the organization. It's that middle level within the organizational structure that has the biggest responsibility to play. And those are the ones that I think sometimes aren't as bought into the message, aren't has bought into what it means for themselves as managers, what it means for themselves as an organization. And that's where the biggest shift needs to be. And as I said, the race is not over. That's the part that really needs to get us to that finish line. Not that there is a finish line when you're talking about something as evolving as DEI.
No, absolutely, and people's expectations change, and industries change, and yeah, I think organizations need to be aware that they need to stay on top of that constantly. It's like getting them to a point of managing it, so that rather than the catch up that a lot of businesses feel like they're doing at the moment, getting to a point where they are receiving that active feedback and acting on it, and then the iterations moving forward. So, with all that in mind and everything that we've talked about today, just from your perspective, what are your kind of hopes for the future in terms of DEI and diversity and inclusion? How the industry is going to move forward in the next 5, 10 years?
My hope is that it doesn't become a nice to have. It doesn't become something that organizations think is a period in time that they have to focus on. My hope is that it gets given the same level of priority and position within an organization has the ESG efforts. No one's ever going to say to an organization, "Oh, your environmental social governance approach is not right. You shouldn't be doing that. There's parts of the world that wouldn't benefit from that." And it becomes such a natural embedded part of those organizations. My hope is that that is the same place that DI lands as well, because it is one and the same thing. We all are very, very, very grateful for the creation of ESG. It wasn't there 50, 60 years ago, and we paid the price for it. But now it's something that's a non-negotiable. It becomes such a big part of organizational psyche, becomes such a big part of organizational fabric, and it makes those organizations much, much better. My hope is that the DEI becomes the same thing, because it's equally as important. It has very, very similar benefits, and they're just so intrinsically linked, that it blows my mind that that there's this walk back, because organizations are bowing to unfounded pressures, in my opinion.
Yeah, understandable completely. And I think as businesses develop DEI and diversify their diversify their workforces. These new people who are now attracted into the industry because they see those change. In time, at the moment, they may be new entrants. Within the next 10 years, they become decision makers. And in turn, their own understanding of what needs to happen goes directly into the process. So once businesses kind of take this on and make these decisions, the next step is the people who are affected by those decisions are adapting that and moving it forward. And hopefully it's a bit of a snowball effect in the future as well.
Yeah, and I'll use a slightly left field example. So, during the pandemic, it also tied in with the rise of Black Lives Matters, and within certainly in the U.S. media, it was a wake up call of how underrepresented minorities were in the media, and Hollywood, all aspects of the media made a very, very concerted effort to increase representation, and the result of that is so much more interesting storylines, so much more interesting TV to watch, so much more interesting movies to watch. And you see the reactions of these little kids who go into cinemas and now they're seeing princesses and heroes, and the main leads look like them, something they didn't have before. And that's caused this spark. And now if you start to take that away, there goes your interesting storylines. There goes your very left field characters and plots, and then there goes that representation. And what then does it say to the next generation when they no longer see themselves at those higher levels of cooperation across industries, across the people that they meet when they're out and about. So it's definitely something that is important, and there's still a lot more work to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there are some good signs so far, but I think you've made some extremely good points for our viewers and our listeners, particularly clients and businesses who are looking for support in moving forward to the next steps, and also reassurance for new entrants and the global community in general that there are opportunities for them, and the work is being done. So yes, thank you very much today, Shalena, for your time and your insights. It's really valuable there, I think, for our audiences.
No worries, it was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. This has been Staffing Strategies Simplified with me, Matt Nicholson, and our guest, Shalena Shaheed, Managing Director of NES Advantage. We've covered some key insights and advice on DEI in the rapidly evolving energy industry, the state of the industry, and how businesses can get ahead of the curve and attract the best talent through diverse and inclusive hiring and retention strategies. If you've enjoyed this episode and would like to learn more, feel free to contact us on social media or via our website at www.nesadvantage.com. Thanks for tuning in.